Hello folks, and welcome to our discussion of God and the theory of evolution. Perhaps the main reason people think that science and religion are in some sort of conflict is Darwin's theory of evolution, and there are two reasons for this. First of all, it seems to contradict Genesis chapters 1 to 3, in which God creates the world within 7 days, whereas evolution requires millions of years for different species to evolve. Secondly, the theory of evolution seems to undermine the design argument. Here we're going to mainly look at Genesis chapters 1 to 3. Now, some Christians worry that the theory of evolution undermines human dignity because it teaches that humans are descended from apes. Genesis actually teaches that humans were created from dust, so descent from apes actually seems to be something of an upgrade. Secondly, our value lies in the fact that God values us. He loves each of us individually. He cares for each of us as individuals, so much that his Son died for us. Our value lies in our relationship to God and in the value God places on us. It has nothing to do with our ancestry. So evolution would not undermine human dignity in any way. Genesis chapters 1 to 3 does cause greater difficulties because that does seem to teach that humans were made on the same day as the animals, which would go completely against Darwin's theory of evolution. Now, Christians who believe that Genesis 1 to 3 should be interpreted literally are called young earth creationists, and some of the most intelligent and in fact finest people I know are young earth creationists. Young earth creationists, however, do not take every verse literally in Genesis' early chapters. For example, Genesis teaches that God walked in the garden with Adam and Eve, but no one pictures God with legs and feet. When Adam and Eve are thrown out of the garden, God knits them clothes, but no one imagines God with fingers. God says that he repents of the fact that he made man when he becomes angry with us just before the flood. It also says that God remembers Noah after the flood. But God can't forget things, and God can't make mistakes being all-knowing. Nobody takes those verses literally. Everybody assumes that it's using metaphorical language to help us understand how God thinks and how God feels about things. So no one takes every verse in Genesis literally. The question we have to ask about Genesis chapter 1 is, are we dealing with something which is more like a literal history or something which is more like poetry? When William Blake wrote Tiger, Tiger, Burning Bright, no one thought he was claiming that a big cat was on fire somewhere. So the question is, are the days in Genesis meant to be taken literally or more like William Blake's poem? Well, it seems to me that there are very good reasons to think that it's not meant to be taken literally. For example, the first 3 days in Genesis chapter 1 end with an evening and a morning. Now, before there were clocks and watches, people measured time by using the sun and the moon and the stars. But the sun and the moon and the stars are not made until the 4th day. This puzzled many people in the ancient world. How could there be an evening and a morning in the absence of the sun? So long before the dawn of modern science, many theologians concluded that the creation week of Genesis chapter 1 should not be interpreted literally. In the city of God, Augustine wondered what kind of days these were. It is extremely difficult or perhaps impossible for us to conceive. And he went on to reject a literal interpretation of the 7 creation days. The early Christian theologian Origen asked what person of any intelligence would think that there existed a first, second and third day and evening and morning without sun, moon and stars. How can you have days without a sun to measure the time? How can you have an evening or morning without a sunset or sunrise? The first readers of Genesis chapter 1 would not have believed that the first days were literal That might have led them to conclude that none of the days were literal in the creation account. And in fact, the creation story is an attack on the myths of other religions. For example, other religions worship the sun, but God makes the sun later than the sky or the land. In some religions, gods had to kill great water monsters before the rest of the world could be created. But in Genesis, God makes the great creatures of the sea. He doesn't have to fight them. They are completely under his control. In fact, there's nothing for any other God to do when Genesis chapter 1 is finished. God has made every part of nature and is in control of every part of it when he rests on the seventh day, which hasn't ended, by the way. There's no evening or morning on the seventh day. It is still ongoing. When God rests, he isn't taking a nap. He's a king resting in his throne, a king taking total command of his kingdom. God is in total control, and therefore there is no room for any other God. There are other reasons to think that Genesis chapters 1 to 3 are not meant to be taken literally. For example, Genesis chapter 2 seems to retell the entire creation account from Adam's point of view. Events happen in a different order in Genesis 2 than they occurred in Genesis 1. And most interestingly, Genesis chapter 2 seems to describe the entire creation happening in one day, not 7. And if that's the case, whoever put the early chapters of Genesis together, a very intelligent author by all accounts, did not think there was a contradiction between Genesis 1, where the world is made in 7 days, and Genesis 2, where it's made in 1 day. That means he must have been viewing those chapters as poetry and not literal historical accounts. So if Genesis chapters 1 to 3 are not meant to give a literal account of how God made the world, but rather meant to teach us that there's only one God, and that God is responsible for the entire creation, then there is no necessary conflict between the theory of evolution and belief in the God of the Bible. In fact, evolution would take a great deal of design to work if it was to play out on Earth to produce human beings. You would need the right laws of nature, the right sort of galaxies, the right planet going round the right sort of star, the right chemicals to be in the right place at the right time, and events to proceed in a very particular order to get all the way from the goo to the zoo to you. In other words, to get from the first bacteria all the way up to the living world to human beings. Evolution would still need an awful lot of what might be termed luck, or what a Christian would call guidance. Granted, a Christian who believes that God can perform miracles and that humans have a special place in God's plan might look at the evidence for evolution very differently than someone who does not believe in such a God. But the big question we have to answer is, did God make the world? Not how did God make the world? It's only when you've answered the first question, did God make the world, that you can begin to debate the second question. What place does evolution have in that account of how God made the world? And as we have seen, the theory of evolution does not seem to undermine the idea that God made all the living creatures on our planet.